The cold air bit at my skin as I stood on the doorstep, the scent of pine trees and cinnamon still lingering in the night. Still, when my son answered the door, his smile didn't reach his eyes. I followed him inside, the warmth of the house feeling foreign, like a place I no longer belonged. As he led me to the kitchen, the weight of his indifference grew heavier with each step. While they gathered around the table laughing, I sat alone in the cold silence. That's when I realized this wasn't Christmas anymore. It was my moment to walk away. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Kathy Monroe stood in front of her son's house, her breath a white mist in the freezing Boston air. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she adjusted the bags of gifts in her arms, the heavy scent of pine and cinnamon mixing with the chill. She smiled faintly to herself. She'd spent hours picking out the perfect presents, each one chosen with love, with care, trying to make this Christmas feel like the ones before, when family had been a tight-knit bond rather than a series of strained connections. The house was warm, welcoming in its outward appearance. Lights twinkled on the porch. A wreath hung from the door. But as Kathy rang the bell, that familiar feeling of discomfort began to settle in her chest, like the weight of unspoken words pressed against her skin. The door swung open, and Sarah stood there, her smile tight. The kind of smile that felt more like a mask than an invitation. "Mom, Merry Christmas," Sarah said, but the words were hollow. The strained tone didn't escape Kathy's notice, but she pushed it aside, telling herself it was just the stress of the holiday. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," Kathy replied, smiling in return, but it didn't reach her eyes. She could feel the coldness radiating off Sarah, like a wall between them. "You can leave the gifts here." Sarah gestured to the hallway table where a few more packages were already piled up, wrapped in expensive paper. Kathy did as she was told, setting her gifts down carefully, noticing how little space there was between the presents Sarah had chosen and the ones Kathy had brought. No place for sentimentality in the pile, just the carefully selected items meant to check off the holiday boxes. "Where's Greg?" Kathy asked, looking over Sarah's shoulder, expecting to see her son. "He's in the dining room," Sarah answered, but Kathy's instinct told her there was something off in the way Sarah said it, as if the conversation was being carefully contained. She moved towards the dining room, her heart beating just a little faster, but when she stepped into the room, she froze. The table was lavishly set, everything in its place, the centerpiece of rich greenery and glowing candles. The scent of roasted meat, mashed potatoes, and gravy hung in the air. It was the Christmas dinner Kathy had envisioned, a beautiful family gathering, just as it had always been. But something was missing, something crucial. Greg's voice broke the moment. "Mom, we've set up the seating arrangements. You'll need to eat in the kitchen," he said, his tone casual, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Kathy's breath caught, but she didn't let her surprise show. She blinked, feeling the space around her tighten as she processed his words. "The kitchen?" she repeated, her voice a little quieter than she intended. "I thought—" She glanced around, half expecting someone to correct him, to tell him it was a joke, but no one did. Greg was already looking down, a fork in his hand, his attention not quite on her. Sarah stepped in then, the slight bitterness in her voice barely masked. "It's just that the table's full. We thought you wouldn't mind." A sharp pang struck Kathy's chest, as if someone had punched her right where she thought her heart was supposed to be. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the dismissal in Sarah's voice, or the sudden realization that the table, her family table, was no longer for her. She'd made the same meal every year, poured so much love into the holiday tradition, and now it felt like nothing more than a formality, something to be gotten through, not cherished. For a split second she thought about saying something, about asking why, about reminding them of all the years she had worked so hard to keep everything together. But the words stuck in her throat. What was the point? Instead, she nodded silently, her throat tight, and turned slowly towards the kitchen. She heard the quiet clink of silverware and laughter behind her as she walked away. The sounds of family, their family, ringing in her ears. The kitchen was small, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. It wasn't a place for Christmas, Kathy thought. It was where meals were hastily prepared and forgotten, where leftovers lingered in containers on the counter. She set the gifts down on the counter with care, each one a token of a love that felt increasingly one-sided. For a moment she just stood there, listening to the muffled voices from the other room, feeling the cool air from the window rush past her as the snow continued to fall outside. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was already shifting. Maybe this wasn't the Christmas she had imagined. Maybe this would be the last one. "Are you all right?" Diane's text buzzed on her phone. Kathy didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her fingers tracing the edge of a glass of wine she'd poured earlier. Finally, Kathy typed back, "I'm fine. It's just time to leave." She didn't know what came over her in that moment, but suddenly, leaving didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like a decision, one that, for the first time in a long time, was completely her own. And she was ready to make it. The kitchen was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering above. Kathy stood by the window, her hands resting on the cool surface of the counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the silence. Outside, the snow fell steadily, coating the world in a blanket of white, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows across the street. For a moment she allowed herself to feel the stillness, to breathe in the peace of the night. The warmth of the house, the bustle of the dinner in the next room, felt like a distant echo. It wasn't her Christmas anymore. Through the thin walls, Kathy could hear the clinking of glasses, the sharp laughter of her son, the murmur of voices that had once been the soundtrack of her life, the sound of family, or at least the semblance of it, carried from the dining room, as if mocking the emptiness of the space she now occupied. She could picture them all gathered around the table, Greg, Sarah, maybe even Lily, laughing and sharing stories, their lives unfolding without her in it. Her heart tightened, but she didn't allow herself to dwell on it. This wasn't the place for self-pity. This wasn't the place for longing. She'd built this house for love, for memories, for tradition. But somewhere along the way, that love had faded, replaced by something colder, more transactional. What was she even holding on to? The Christmases of the past? The family she once thought she knew? She remembered the days when Tom would say, "We stick together, no matter what. Family first." His voice, deep and comforting, used to echo in her mind on days like this. But Tom was gone now. The weight of his absence pressed down on her chest more than the cold ever could. How many times had they sat around that table together? His hand gently covering hers, his eyes meeting hers with that knowing, steady look. "Kathy, we stick together." But no one was sticking together anymore, and that was the truth, no matter how hard it was to face. She turned away from the window, her gaze landing on the gifts she had brought. They looked out of place here, on this sterile countertop, surrounded by the leftover traces of a dinner that didn't include her. She'd spent hours picking them out, wrapping them carefully, thinking of what would make them smile, what would show them she cared. But all those thoughts, all that effort, were reduced to this moment, one more sacrifice she had made in a long line of sacrifices. A buzz from her phone broke the silence. She picked it up, glancing at the screen. Diane's name blinked back at her in the glow of the screen. Kathy's fingers hovered for a second before she tapped on the message. "Are you okay?" For a moment, Kathy just stared at the text, her thumb tracing the edges of the screen. Was she okay? No, but she was as close to it as she had ever been in years. In some ways, she felt lighter. Lighter than she had in so long, as though she had finally shed the weight of a life she wasn't sure she wanted to keep living anymore. She sighed, wiping her eyes quickly. The tears weren't for them. Not anymore. They were for her. For all the years spent, for the life that had been overshadowed by someone else's demands. It's time, she thought. She tapped out a reply, the words coming easier than she expected. I'm fine, it's just time to leave. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The decision had been made. Simple as that. No more explaining, no more convincing herself she could still play a part in this broken family dynamic. No more waiting for their approval, for their acknowledgement. For the first time, she felt a sense of finality settle into her bones, a quiet calm that was almost startling. And in that silence, something else bloomed. Something Kathy hadn't expected. Freedom. She let the phone slip from her fingers as her mind continued to race ahead. There was no going back to the way things were, and maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time for her to rewrite her own narrative, to start building a future that didn't hinge on the past. The thought was like a spark in the dark. The kitchen, once a place of hurried meals and forgotten conversations, suddenly felt like a portal, a threshold to something else, something bigger. What did she want? The sound of laughter from the dining room grew louder, more insistent. The clink of glasses, the hum of conversation, it all felt distant, as though the people inside that room were living in a different world. Kathy stood up straight, a sense of clarity sweeping through her like a sudden gust of wind. She wasn't going to stay in this house, not anymore. Not as the second choice, not as the afterthought. She wasn't going to wait for Greg to remember she was part of the family. She wasn't going to beg for their approval, for scraps of their attention. The life she wanted was out there, waiting for her to claim it. And this Christmas, she was going to take the first step toward it. As she moved toward the door, her phone buzzed again, but she didn't need to check it. The decision was made. It was done. She was done. And as she stepped into the night, her heart beat steadily, the cold air filling her lungs like a promise. There was no going back now. Kathy's breath escaped in a cloud of white as she stepped out into the biting cold of the night. The wind cut through her coat, but it was nothing compared to the chill she had just left behind in Greg's house. She didn't look back as the door clicked shut behind her. It was done. No more pretending. No more playing the part of the woman who had to beg for a place at the table. Her car was parked on the driveway, the engine still warm from the drive over, but the world around her felt empty. The streetlights glowed faintly through the snow, casting long shadows on the road that seemed to stretch on forever. The once comforting landmarks of this neighborhood, the corner shop, the old bakery she and Tom used to visit every Sunday, felt alien now. She had driven this road 1,000 times before, but tonight, it felt like she was passing through a place that no longer held any meaning for her. She slid into the driver's seat of her car, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her pulse thrummed in her ears as she put the car into drive and headed down the street. The familiar houses, once warm and inviting, full of friends and family, now loomed in the darkness, silent and cold. She passed the old oak tree they had planted when Lily was born, its branches heavy with snow, and her chest tightened. It was all just memories now. As Kathy neared her own house, she slowed the car and pulled into the driveway, the headlights illuminating the silent, dark facade of the home she had shared with Tom. The house, which had once been full of life, now felt hollow. No lights on the windows, no wreaths on the door, no life inside. Just an empty shell. It wasn't how she imagined this night would feel, but it was how it was. And somehow, it didn't seem all that wrong. She sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. The snowflakes continued to fall softly, but they seemed like tiny little whispers, filling the air with their quiet melancholy. She could almost hear Tom's voice in the silence, feel the weight of his presence even though he was gone. He had always been the anchor in this place, the one who kept them all grounded, who made the house feel like home, no matter what was happening in the world outside. Kathy opened the door, her boots crunching on the fresh snow as she stepped out of the car. The cold bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. With each step toward the front door, she felt like she was shedding something. The weight of family expectations, of the years spent keeping everything together for everyone else. Those things seemed to fall away as she walked toward the house. Inside, it was just as she had left it. Quiet. Empty. The silence was almost deafening after the noise and bustle of Greg's house. The soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound, the slow passage of time in a place that had once been filled with laughter, the hum of conversation. She took a breath and made her way into the living room, where Tom's favorite chair sat by the fireplace. She could almost see him in it, his worn leather jacket draped over the back, his boots left haphazardly by the hearth. But tonight, it was empty, and it was hers. She sank down into the chair, the soft fabric cool beneath her fingers, and reached for the wine glass she had left on the side table earlier. The glass was half full, its contents dark and rich, the sharp bite of red wine a welcome distraction. She took a sip, savoring the warmth spreading through her chest as she leaned back in the chair. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, it was just her and the fire. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. Kathy closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth of the fire to seep into her bones, letting the tension melt away. The anger she had felt earlier, the sharp sting of betrayal, was beginning to dull. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. This was her moment. For years, she had carried the weight of everyone else's needs, always putting her family's expectations before her own. She had stayed silent, swallowed the hurt, and tried to hold everything together, believing that's what love required. But now, she could feel the shift in her bones. She wasn't going to be their burden anymore. Her eyes flicked over to the mantel where the family photos once hung, pictures of Christmases past, of birthdays and anniversaries, of vacations spent together. There had been a time when those memories filled her with warmth, when they were a reminder of the love that had existed. But now, the frames felt like ghosts, haunting her with their illusions of what had been. Kathy took another sip of wine, her fingers tightening around the glass. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. A sense of clarity, a sense of resolve. She wasn't going to let them take this from her. Not anymore. She didn't need them. She didn't need their approval, their validation. She had done enough for them. Now it was time to do something for herself. The fire crackled softly, its embers glowing in the quiet room, and Kathy stared into the flames, feeling the future unfold before her. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about the path ahead would be easy. But she was ready. She was ready to walk away from the house, from the family that had left her behind. She was ready to build her own life, to live on her terms. And as the fire burned low, Kathy allowed herself to feel the weight of the evening settle into something stronger, the quiet, unshakable truth that the rest of her life was hers to define. And nothing, nothing at all, was going to stop her. Kathy set the wine glass down on the side table, the deep red liquid shimmering under the soft light of the fire. She stared at the flames for a long moment, the crackling of the wood filling the room like a soft lullaby. She hadn't realized how heavy the silence had been until she found herself alone in this house, this home that had been filled with noise and love and loss. Now, it was just her. Alone, yes, but for the first time in years, she wasn't lonely. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with Greg's name. For a heartbeat, she considered ignoring it. Let it ring out like the hundreds of calls and texts she had silenced over the years. But something inside her stirred. A quiet defiance, the remnants of anger, and the final resolve to close this chapter. She picked up the phone, her fingers steady as she swiped the screen to answer. "Mom?" Greg's voice came through the line, tinny and distant, but laced with confusion. "Why are you leaving? We can make room at the table. We'll figure it out. Come back." She took a slow breath, her gaze still fixed on the fire as if the flames could give her strength. This was it. The moment she had been building toward. The conversation she knew would come, but had never quite prepared for. "No, Greg," she said quietly, her voice calm. She wasn't angry now. She was just done. "There's no room for me in your family anymore." The words landed heavier than she expected, but they were true. The space at the table was never about a seat or a dish. It was about how she was viewed, how she had been pushed to the edges, made to feel small and insignificant, even as she had sacrificed her own needs to keep them together. It had all become so painfully clear tonight. "Mom, come on. It was just a misunderstanding." Greg's voice grew more insistent. She could hear the faint sound of his voice echoing in the background, the clink of glasses, the laughter from the dining room. Everything she had just left behind. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. We were just trying to—" "Greg!" Kathy's voice cut through the air, steady and firm. She felt the weight of her decision in her bones. This was her final word on the matter. "I'm not interested in being a burden. I've spent enough of my life trying to make room in your world, trying to keep the peace, trying to earn a place in it. I've done all that I can. I'll figure things out on my own." She let the words sit there, letting them hang in the air like a declaration. Kathy listened as Greg's voice faltered on the other end, heard the rise and fall of his breath. For a moment, she imagined him standing there, maybe pacing in the dining room, trying to figure out how to fix what he couldn't understand. "Mom, don't do this," he said, his tone softer now. "I'm sorry. We never meant to make you feel like that. Please, just come back. It's Christmas. Don't make this about—" He trailed off, and Kathy could almost picture him struggling for the right words, trying to navigate the mess they'd created. But this was no longer about apologies. This was about reclaiming the part of herself she had buried for so long. "I'm not coming back, Greg," Kathy said, the words flowing from her with a quiet strength. "I'm not looking for your forgiveness or your understanding anymore. I just need to move forward. And that doesn't include your family. Not in the way it used to." There was a long silence on the other end, and Kathy felt a strange calm wash over her. It was final. Her decision had been made, and for once, it felt like she was the one in control. No more begging, no more trying to fit into their mold, no more silencing herself for the sake of family. She listened to Greg's breathing on the other end, and there it was, his frustration, his confusion. But there was something else too. Something quieter. Regret, maybe. Or perhaps the smallest inkling of realization that this time, Kathy wouldn't back down. "Mom," Greg started again, but Kathy interrupted him before he could go any further. "Goodbye, Greg," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "Take care of yourself." And without waiting for a reply, she ended the call. The finality of it settled in like a weight lifted from her shoulders. She stared at the phone for a moment, her thumb hovering over the screen, but there was nothing more to say. No more justifications, No more explanations. She didn't need to explain herself to them. She was done. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Kathy leaned back into Tom's favorite chair, her fingers tightening around the glass of wine. She wasn't sad anymore. She wasn't angry. She was free. And that feeling, like a long-buried treasure, unfurled deep within her, filling the empty spaces she hadn't even known existed. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she didn't even look. There was nothing left to answer. She was done with the waiting. She was done with the hollow calls, the empty promises. Kathy closed her eyes, her heart beating steadily in her chest, a calm certainty filling her every breath. The future, her future, was now hers to shape, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away. It was time to step into the life she had always deserved. Kathy set the phone down, the silence in the room wrapping around her like a warm blanket. The faint hum of the house, the crackling of the fire, and the soft tick of the grandfather clock were the only sounds left to keep her company. For the first time in a long while, Kathy felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. No more pretending, no more hoping for understanding that was never coming. She had said goodbye, but it wasn't just to Greg. It was to everything that had held her back. She stood up, the wineglass still cradled in her hand. The firelight flickered across her face, illuminating the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't sure where this new strength was coming from, but it was undeniable. The decisions she'd been putting off, the changes she'd been avoiding, were all staring her in the face now. It was time. Without another thought, she walked to her desk, where her laptop sat closed and waiting. She sat down in front of it, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. It felt almost absurd to her now, how she had spent so many years living in the shadow of everyone else's expectations. It was her turn now. No more second-guessing, no more apologies. She opened a new email to her lawyer, James, the one who had helped her with the paperwork after Tom's passing. She took a slow breath, her hands steady as she typed. James, I need to request a full review of my will. I've decided to make significant changes, and I would like to meet as soon as possible to discuss the details. Please let me know when you're available. Her fingers hesitated over the final sentence. I want everything in order. She added it with a quiet sense of finality before hitting send. It was done. Her mind was already racing ahead to the next steps. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text message from Diane. Time for a change. We'll be meeting with James tomorrow. Kathy smiled faintly as she read the message. Diane had known her longer than anyone, and Kathy could practically hear her voice through the text. She had been her anchor, her support, through everything. Kathy quickly typed her reply. It's time. I'm making the changes now. Everything is moving forward. She set the phone down, her mind already turning to the next task. It felt almost mechanical, but there was no hesitation in her thoughts. She wasn't looking back. Kathy opened her notebook, the one she had kept for years, with scribbled notes about her assets and plans for the future. She pulled out a pen and began making a list of the things she needed to change. It was strange, almost liberating, to think of her estate in these terms. In the past, it had been all about keeping the family together, making sure everyone was taken care of. But that was before she realized that she had to take care of herself first. She wrote down her list. Remove Greg and Sarah from the will. Move a portion of the estate into a trust for Lily. Establish a separate business account for my new ventures. Ensure all legal documents are updated and signed. The last point was the most important. Kathy had always put family first, even when they hadn't done the same for her. But Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, was different. Kathy hadn't forgotten the way Lily had looked at her earlier, the conflicted look in her eyes. She was still young, still under her parents' influence. But Kathy had no doubt that Lily had a mind of her own. Kathy wasn't going to leave her at the mercy of Greg and Sarah. She made a note in the margin, underlining it 3 times. Secure Lily's future, away from their reach. Kathy took another deep breath and closed the notebook. She wasn't just securing her own future now. She was giving Lily a chance at something different. Something better. Kathy had given so much of her life to people who never appreciated it. But now, she had the power to rewrite the script. She could still be a force for good in someone's life, even if that someone wasn't her son. With the list in front of her, Kathy's mind shifted into action mode. She picked up her phone and called her financial advisor. "Hi, it's Kathy Monroe. I need to set up an appointment to update my will and make sure all my accounts are in order. Can we schedule something for tomorrow?" As soon as she hung up, Kathy grabbed her coat and headed for the door. The world outside was dark and quiet, the snow still falling in a soft, steady stream. She wasn't afraid anymore. There were no more strings pulling her back. No more pretending to be the person she wasn't. The future was hers now. She slid into the driver's seat of her car, the cool leather against her skin grounding her in the present. She didn't need to know exactly what would come next, but she knew this was the beginning of something. She felt it in her bones. She wasn't just leaving behind the people who had held her back. She was stepping into a new life, one she would define on her own terms. Kathy started the engine, the hum of the car filling the space around her. The night felt alive, full of possibility. She drove down the street, her mind clear, her heart light. The world was wide open now, and she was ready to take it on. As she turned the corner, the headlights caught the familiar old oak tree in front of Greg's house, its snow-covered branches bending under the weight. It was a landmark, a reminder of the past. Kathy drove past it, her grip on the wheel steady, her gaze ahead. She wasn't going back. The only way was forward. The house was still. The kind of stillness that felt like it had been here forever. Only now, it wasn't oppressive. It was quiet in a way that filled every space, each room seeming to breathe at its own pace. Kathy stood in the kitchen, the soft glow from the overhead lights casting long shadows across the countertops, and the scent of the meal she was preparing, something simple, yet festive, lingered in the air. There was no rush to finish, no obligation to set the table for anyone else. Tonight, it was just her. She carefully arranged the plates on the table, the colors and smells filling the room with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The table was small, but it didn't need to be any bigger. There was no one else to feed, no one else to impress. Just the quiet rhythm of chopping vegetables, stirring a simmering sauce, and the steady hum of the oven. She had always loved the process of cooking, the way each step felt like a meditation, a slow unwinding of all the tension and worries. But tonight, as she stood in the warmth of the kitchen, something about it felt different. It felt whole. The candles on the table flickered softly, casting a gentle light over her meal. She set the last dish down with a small smile. It wasn't the grand dinner she might have prepared for a big family gathering, but it didn't need to be. It was just right for one. The meal was rich with memories of Christmases past. The roasted chicken, the cranberry sauce, the potatoes mashed with care. But tonight, it felt like a moment for her, not for anyone else. As she sat down to eat, the first bite was warm and satisfying. The flavors familiar but comforting in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she had truly cooked for herself. For years, everything had been for them: Greg, Sarah, the kids, even Tom when he was still here. Now, as she took another bite, she felt a sense of gratitude, not for the food, but for the quiet space she had carved out. This was hers, and for the first time, it felt like it could always be this way. The phone on the table buzzed, a brief interruption in the calm. Kathy reached for it. her fingers lingering for just a second before unlocking the screen. It was a text from Diane. "How's your Christmas?" Kathy glanced at the text and smiled. Diane knew her better than anyone, knew what today had meant, knew how heavy the decision to walk away had been. But Diane also knew the strength Kathy had in her, even when Kathy had doubted it. Kathy quickly typed her reply. "It's exactly what I needed." She set the phone back down, the words feeling like a seal on this new chapter. It wasn't just a holiday alone, it was a reclamation of herself, of the space she had always given away. Her hands wrapped around the glass of wine in front of her, the deep red liquid catching the light. The soft swirl of it a reflection of the moment. She didn't feel sad. She didn't feel lonely. She felt free. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for someone else's approval. She wasn't trying to keep anyone happy except for herself. Kathy leaned back in her chair, the soft sound of the wind outside the only other noise in the house. The house that had once been filled with the clatter of dishes, the chatter of family, the laughter of children. It had been full of everything they needed. But tonight, the silence in the house wasn't lonely. It wasn't a void. It was a space that was entirely hers, one she had fought for, and one she would protect. Her mind wandered to the years of sacrifice, how she had worked so hard to make Christmas special for everyone, how she had kept everything in balance, even when it meant putting herself last. The years when Greg's demands had come before her own needs, when Sarah's coldness had been something she swallowed quietly. She had given them everything, trying to preserve some semblance of family, of love, but it had never been returned in the way she had hoped. She had always thought that was the price of being a mother, of being the one who held everything together. But as she sat in the warmth of her own home, surrounded by the soft hum of her thoughts, Kathy realized that she had given too much for too long. And now, it was time to take it back. The meal was done, and she cleared the table, the last traces of dinner being wiped away in the quiet. She wasn't rushing. There was no reason to hurry. For once, she could enjoy the stillness without the nagging feeling that there was something she had to fix, someone else she had to take care of. The world outside might have been full of chaos, but in here, in this house, Kathy was at peace. She moved to the living room, where the fire was still crackling softly, its warmth filling the room. The glow from the flames danced across the walls, making the room feel alive with possibilities. She could have spent the evening in front of the television, trying to distract herself from the quiet. She could have filled the air with noise, with voices that weren't her own. But she didn't need that anymore. She didn't need to drown out the silence. She had learned to embrace it. Kathy took a deep breath, her eyes closing for a moment as she listened to the fire. She wasn't hiding from her feelings anymore. She wasn't running from the past. She was moving forward, slowly, steadily. And for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself for it. The world outside could keep turning, but Kathy had made her decision. She was no longer waiting for the approval of those who didn't see her worth. Tonight, Christmas had become more than a holiday. It had become a symbol of everything she was reclaiming. And in the stillness of her home, she knew the hardest part was over. The rest of her life was waiting for her, and she was ready to embrace it. The evening stretched on in its peaceful quiet, the fire softly crackling in the hearth as Kathy sat on the edge of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her. The glass of wine had long since been emptied, but the feeling it had left, warmth and quiet satisfaction, still lingered in her chest. The house was still, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred, as if the silence had been waiting for her to notice it all along. She had no plans to rush through the evening, no more distractions, no more excuses. Tonight, she allowed herself to truly sit with her thoughts, without feeling the weight of obligations pulling at her every minute. It was time to think about what came next. Kathy reached for her phone again, this time to search for something that had been simmering in the back of her mind for weeks. She had always put everyone else first: her family, her business, her responsibilities. For years, she had deferred her own dreams, her own desires. But now, something had shifted. She wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to move forward. The first search was easy: volunteer opportunities in Boston. Kathy scanned the list, her finger hovering over the search results. It had always been something she wanted to do: give back, help others. But she had never found the time, the energy, or the space to pursue it. Now, as her eyes scanned the possibilities, she felt the first spark of something new, something that would be entirely hers. She bookmarked several organizations, each one offering ways she could help her community, ways that could make a real impact. There was something freeing about the idea: her choices, her time. It was a slow but steady realization that she didn't have to do everything in the confines of what was expected. She could carve her own path now. Kathy sat back and let out a slow breath, her mind already moving on to the next step: travel. For years, she had dreamed of seeing the world, of visiting places far beyond the confines of Boston, Paris, Rome, the lush landscapes of New Zealand. She had always told herself there would be time, always put it off until another day, another season. But today, tonight, she realized that today was as good as any to start living the life she had always wanted. She began typing again, her fingers moving with purpose now as she researched flights, destinations, accommodations. It wasn't just about ticking off boxes. It was about freedom, about finally giving herself permission to explore the world on her own terms. The thought of walking down the cobblestone streets of Paris, of eating in little cafes along the Seine, made her heart beat just a little faster. Her gaze drifted to the window, the snow continuing to fall softly outside, the flakes catching the light of the street lamps as they danced through the night. She could almost hear the bustle of a city far away, a place where she had always wanted to go, but never allowed herself the time. But now, for the first time, Kathy didn't feel the nagging weight of what was left undone. There was no more guilt, no more second-guessing. Kathy closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, the realization settling over her like a warm blanket. She had been waiting for their approval her whole life. Greg, Sarah, Tom. She had spent so many years trying to earn their love, their respect. But tonight, the realization hit her squarely in the chest. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need to live up to their expectations. She could live for herself. The clarity was both overwhelming and liberating. Kathy had built her life around other people's needs and desires, trying to fill a role she was never truly wanted in. It was no wonder she had felt empty for so long. But now, in the calm of her home, she understood. She was worthy of her own love, her own approval. She didn't need validation from anyone but herself. She glanced at the phone in her hand and saw several travel websites she had opened. The world was there, waiting for her. All those places, all those dreams, were now within reach. The quiet hum of the world outside seemed to call to her in a way it never had before. This was her time. It had always been hers. A sudden idea flashed through her mind, something that had always seemed impossible before. Kathy quickly pulled up her calendar and typed in a tentative date for her first trip abroad. It was just an idea, a seed planted, but it felt real. The trip would be her first step toward embracing the world on her own terms. She set the phone down gently and looked around her house. Her house, now hers in every way. It was a simple home, but it was filled with new meaning, a space for her and no one else. It felt lighter now, as if the house itself had been waiting for Kathy to step into the life she had long pushed aside. She stood, walked over to the window, and stared out at the falling snow. The world outside was silent, still, but there was something stirring within her. The future wasn't a distant thing anymore. It was right here, waiting. Tomorrow, she would call the volunteer organization, book her first travel plan, and begin working on the next phase of her life. And for the first time in forever, Kathy wasn't afraid. She was ready. The life she had always deserved was finally within her reach, and she wasn't about to let it slip away again. Kathy's days had settled into a rhythm that felt like a quiet revelation, the kind of peace she'd never realized she was missing. She had always lived for others, their schedules, their needs, their expectations. Now, with the weight of all that lifted, she had space to breathe, to create, and most importantly, to choose. Every morning she woke with a sense of possibility that was foreign to her, but it was welcome. She had made the decision to give herself this time, this freedom, and she wasn't about to squander it. Each day, she did something new. She started visiting the local volunteer organizations she had bookmarked, meeting people who shared her passion for giving back. Her mornings were filled with helping others, and her afternoons were spent on activities she had long put off. Yoga classes she'd always been curious about, afternoon walks through the park, and reading books she had abandoned in favor of family obligations. For the first time in ages, Kathy felt her spirit begin to heal, to expand. One afternoon, as she sat in the park, enjoying the quiet rhythm of the world around her, her phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a text from Lily. "Can I come over tomorrow?" Kathy smiled, the warmth of the message settling over her like the sunlight streaming through the trees. She had noticed that Lily had started spending more time with her lately, a shift she hadn't expected, but one that filled her with an unexpected joy. The girl who had once seemed to be trapped under the shadow of her parents was now showing signs of independence, of thinking for herself. Kathy knew that Lily had been raised in the thick of tension, in the chaos of Greg and Sarah's expectations, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for the way Lily was slowly finding her own voice. Of course. "I'll make us some tea." Kathy's fingers danced across the screen as she typed her reply, feeling a lightness in her chest that hadn't been there in years. She didn't know what had prompted Lily to reach out more, but Kathy knew one thing for sure. It felt good. It felt right. And even though Kathy had distanced herself from Greg and Sarah, the connection with her granddaughter had only deepened. Kathy had never wanted to be a burden, but as the days passed, she realized something she hadn't understood before. She wasn't just helping Lily, she was showing her what it meant to live authentically, to take control of one's own life. The following morning, Kathy found herself in her kitchen, setting out 2 cups of tea as the clock ticked toward Lily's arrival. It was a simple thing, but it felt significant. Tea with her granddaughter in the calm of her home. No drama, no obligations, just the two of them. As they sat together, chatting about everything and nothing, Kathy listened more than she spoke. Lily was different now, more at ease, her words coming with a new confidence. They talked about her future, her dreams, and the growing tension between her parents and her. Kathy could see the conflict in Lily's eyes, the pull between loyalty to her parents and the growing awareness that things weren't as they seemed. It made Kathy's heart ache in a way she hadn't expected, but at the same time, she was proud of the young woman Lily was becoming. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lily said after a long pause, her eyes meeting Kathy's. "About what you're doing, changing everything. It makes sense, you know. I mean, I've been thinking about my own life too. I don't want to just follow what they expect. I want to live my life on my terms, like you're doing." Kathy's heart swelled, a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name swirling inside her. She didn't say anything at first, just reached across the table and squeezed Lily's hand. This was what she had hoped for, that Lily would see her choices not as selfishness, but as a form of self-care, a path to reclaiming her own happiness. Later that evening, after Lily had left, Kathy sat alone in the living room, her mind drifting back to the past few months. She had made her decision, and she had followed through. There was no turning back. But when the phone rang again, the familiar name flashing on the screen, Greg, she hesitated. It had been a while since his last call, and she knew what he wanted. His apologies, his attempts to pull her back into the fold, to make things right. Kathy didn't pick up. She let the phone ring, her heart steady. There was no need to explain herself anymore. No need to make him understand. She had spent a lifetime trying to be what he wanted, and now she was finally living for herself. The ringing stopped, and Kathy felt a strange calm wash over her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was just done. It felt like she had turned a page, and that page was blank, ready to be filled with the life she was finally ready to live. Her mind wandered back to the will, the final decision that had been made. It was no longer about what Greg and Sarah wanted. Her life was hers now, and every choice she had made, every shift in her world had led her to this moment. There was no going back. Her will had been updated, and with it, her future had been rewritten. And then, as if to seal the finality of it all, Kathy opened her laptop, feeling the stirring of a dream she had buried long ago. She had been thinking about starting a business. Something small at first, but meaningful. A venture that would allow her to share her skills, her passions, and make a difference on her own terms. She began drafting ideas, laying out plans, researching the kind of impact she could have. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, and Kathy felt something inside her stir, excited, hopeful, alive. The future was hers to create, and this time, there was nothing and no one holding her back. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with anticipation. Kathy sat at the long table, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the legal documents that lay before her. The sharp scent of freshly printed paper mingled with the faint odor of old wood and polished floors. The room was hushed, the only sound the quiet shuffle of papers and the murmur of the people filling the seats. She glanced around, her eyes flicking briefly to Greg and Sarah. They sat across the room, their faces set in grim, determined expressions. Kathy knew why they were here. They had come to fight, to contest the will she had spent months adjusting, to take back control over something they believed was theirs. But for the first time, Kathy didn't feel the slightest tremor of fear. She didn't feel the weight of their judgment hanging over her. Her lawyer, James, sat next to her, his calm presence a steady reassurance. He had been with her every step of the way, guiding her through the labyrinth of legal processes. Today, everything was in place. The papers had been filed, the documentation was airtight, and her decisions were well supported. She wasn't just defending her choices, she was asserting them, with every ounce of confidence she had gained over the past few months. "Are you ready?" James asked, his voice low but steady. Kathy met his gaze and gave a small, confident nod. The judge walked in, and the room immediately fell silent. He was an older man, his expression neutral as he glanced down at the papers before him. The gavel struck with a sharp bang, and the proceedings began. Greg and Sarah's lawyer was the first to speak, launching into an impassioned argument about Kathy's changes to the will. Their claims were familiar: misunderstanding, manipulation, undue influence. They tried to paint Kathy as an emotional woman, someone who had acted out of spite and bitterness. They tried to cast doubt on her decisions, insinuating that her actions had been rash, that she wasn't in her right mind when she made the changes. But Kathy didn't flinch. She didn't need to defend herself against their words. She had already made her case. James, calm and composed, began presenting the evidence. The documents signed and notarized, the consistent record of Kathy's well-being, and the fact that her decisions had been made with full awareness of what she was doing. There was no doubt, no ambiguity. Kathy's decisions were legally sound, and the court would see that. As the argument continued, Kathy felt a sense of distance from the scene unfolding before her. Greg and Sarah were desperate, floundering with each attempt to undermine her. They had come in with the expectation that they could bully her, intimidate her into submission, but Kathy was not the woman she had been when they last spoke. She was no longer the one who had been silenced by their demands. She was in control now, and the realization settled over her like a gentle wave. Her thoughts drifted back to the months leading up to this moment, the changes she had made to her life, the new ventures she had begun to explore. She had not only taken control of her finances, but she had also carved out space for herself emotionally, filling her days with things that mattered to her: volunteer work, yoga, new friendships, and even the plans she had made for her business. She wasn't just fighting for her assets, she was fighting for her right to live as she chose. James wrapped up his presentation, and the courtroom fell silent once more. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping over the documents before him, then across the room to Greg and Sarah. They looked tense, expectant, almost as if they thought they had a chance of swaying him. But Kathy knew better now. The weight of the legal documents, the precedence of her decisions, and the clarity of her intentions stood as a solid wall against their accusations. The judge's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. After reviewing the evidence and considering the arguments presented, I find no grounds to contest the validity of the changes made to the will. Kathy Monroe's decisions are legally sound and clearly made with full awareness and intent. Kathy held her breath as the judge continued, but the words that followed sealed her fate in the best way possible. Therefore, the changes to the will are upheld and the claims made by the contesting parties are dismissed. For a moment, the room was still. Kathy's heart raced, and she let the weight of the words sink in. The case had been decided in her favor. It was done. She had won. Greg and Sarah sat frozen, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anger. Their lawyer stammered something under his breath, but Kathy didn't need to hear it. She wasn't interested in their reaction anymore. She had been through the fire, and she had come out the other side stronger than ever. The judge's gavel struck again, signaling the end of the hearing, and Kathy stood up slowly, her hands steady as she gathered her things. She met James's eyes, and the faintest smile tugged at her lips. "You did it," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Kathy nodded, her chest swelling with a quiet pride she had never allowed herself to feel before. As they walked out of the courtroom, Kathy felt a strange sense of finality. The decision had been made, and she had the power to live with it, to own it. The past was behind her, and the future was wide open. Greg and Sarah could keep their anger, their resentment. They could fight for what they believed was theirs. But Kathy knew one thing for certain. She was free. And for the first time in a long time, she was living her life on her own terms. The life she had reclaimed was just beginning. The victory in the courtroom had felt like a weight being lifted. But now, months later, it was more than that. It had become a new life. Kathy sat at her desk, looking at the final drafts of her will, her assets, and the legacy she had carefully and thoughtfully put in place. She had done it. Every decision had been hers to make, every step carefully considered. Her financial future was secure, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just living for others, she was living for herself. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the bright, late afternoon sun was casting golden light across the room. The world outside felt so vast, so full of potential. She had reclaimed her future, and it was full of possibilities. It wasn't just about the money, it was about freedom. Freedom to travel, to build something that was hers, to invest in the things that mattered most. The small business venture she had been planning with Lily had begun to take shape. Kathy had always been interested in design, something simple but elegant, and now, with Lily's help, she was launching a boutique that would combine her love of creating beautiful spaces with her passion for connecting with people. It was everything Kathy had ever wanted, but had never had the time or the confidence to pursue. Now, with Lily by her side, it felt right. It felt like the perfect time. Lily had blossomed in ways Kathy hadn't expected. She was a natural with the business side of things, organized, efficient, and driven, and Kathy couldn't have been prouder. The two of them had spent hours together, discussing ideas, researching the market, and sketching out designs. The process brought them closer, deepening the bond that had been fragile for so long. Kathy had always feared that Greg's influence on Lily would overshadow her own, but now Lily was carving out her own path, and Kathy was there, guiding her, not from a place of obligation, but from love and respect. As Kathy finalized the plans for the boutique, she felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. The business wasn't just a financial venture, it was a declaration, a statement that she was no longer going to live in the shadows of someone else's dreams. The boutique would be her legacy, something that reflected her own creativity, her own vision, and Lily's. Together, they were building something that would outlast anything Greg or Sarah could ever take from her. Her phone buzzed, and Kathy's attention shifted. It was a message from Diane, her ever-faithful friend, who had been her rock through all of the tumult. "Let's get together soon, okay? I've been thinking about everything you've done. You've really taken your life back." Kathy smiled at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard to reply. "I have, Diane. I really have." The business was progressing beautifully, but so were other aspects of Kathy's life. She'd started taking the trips she had always dreamed about, places she had once convinced herself could wait. Her first solo trip had been to Paris, and as she walked through the cobblestone streets, sipping wine in small cafes and marveling at the architecture, she felt a quiet joy that was all her own. It was more than just a getaway, it was a celebration. Then there was Italy, Rome, Florence. Kathy found herself getting lost in the art, in the history, in the joy of simply existing in a place so different from her everyday life. She hadn't realized how much she had needed it until she was there, standing beneath the beauty of the Sistine Chapel or strolling along the banks of the Arno River. It was freedom. It was life in its purest, most exhilarating form. Back home, Kathy spent her days working on the business and filling her time with the things that truly mattered to her. Yoga, hiking, reading. Even just spending time with Lily, talking about everything and nothing as they built something from the ground up. For the first time, Kathy felt whole. But as time passed, she noticed something else happening. Greg and Sarah were slowly fading from the family narrative. They didn't call as often. The attempts at reestablishing contact became fewer and fewer. Kathy wasn't surprised. She had expected it. Their loss was not just financial. It was emotional. They had never truly seen her, never understood the depth of her strength. And now, she wasn't about to go chasing their approval. It wasn't just that they were fading, it was that Kathy no longer cared. She had found her own peace, her own path, and their rejection was a distant echo now, one that held no power over her. She had spent too long caring for their needs, waiting for their approval, and now, she realized with a quiet pride, it no longer mattered. She was finally living the life she had always dreamed of, and she was doing it on her terms. That evening, as Kathy sat in her favorite chair by the fire with a glass of wine in hand, Lily joined her, settling in beside her with a smile. The two of them had spent so many hours together, but tonight, as they shared the quiet of the evening, Kathy felt a deep sense of contentment. "Thank you," Lily said, her voice soft but sure, "for everything. I don't know if I ever told you, but you've really changed my life. You've shown me how to live for myself, not for anyone else." Kathy's heart swelled. She had done it. She had shown Lily how to take control, how to trust herself, and how to live authentically. She was passing the torch now, knowing that Lily would carry it forward. Kathy reached over, giving her granddaughter's hand a gentle squeeze. "You've always had it in you, Lily. I'm just glad you're starting to see that for yourself." And as they sat there, the crackling fire casting a warm glow in the room, Kathy knew that she had made the right choice. She had taken control of her life, built something real, and in doing so, had given both herself and Lily a chance to live the life they had always deserved. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. A year had passed since that fateful Christmas, the day Kathy had walked out of Greg's house with nothing but the weight of her own decisions behind her. It felt like a lifetime ago, a lifetime that had been filled with growth, challenges, and a quiet, relentless transformation. Kathy sat in her favorite chair by the window now, the sunlight casting long shadows across the room. The house was hers, the space was hers, and every moment felt like an affirmation that she had made the right choice. Her gaze lingered on the familiar streets outside, the same ones she had passed 1,000 times before, but now they felt new. Everything felt new. Kathy had built a life she was proud of, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. And for the first time, she felt the weight of every decision, every sacrifice, every choice that had led her to this point. Greg and Sarah had tried to rebuild their lives after the court ruling, but it was clear to Kathy that their world had shifted in ways they didn't know how to navigate. Kathy was no longer a part of their narrative, and though they had tried to reach out, it was as if a door had closed that they couldn't open again. They had faded into the periphery of her life, and it was a place where they would remain. Kathy was no longer willing to take on the role of the dutiful mother or the accommodating relative. She had moved on. Her business, her boutique, was flourishing, growing beyond what she had ever imagined. Each new client, each completed design project, filled her with a sense of accomplishment. The boutique was no longer just a dream. It was a living, breathing testament to her resilience. It was her passion made tangible, and it gave her a sense of purpose that no family obligation ever had. Kathy had poured her heart into every piece of furniture, every room she had designed, and now she was watching her hard work pay off. Lily, too, was thriving. Kathy had never expected their relationship to evolve this way, but over the months, it had deepened. They spent more time together, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect and love. Kathy had taught Lily more than just business strategies. She had shown her what it meant to live life on her own terms, to trust herself, to take risks, and Lily had taken those lessons to heart. She had stepped into her own light, personally and professionally, and Kathy couldn't be prouder. Watching Lily take on new projects at the boutique, helping clients with their vision, and confidently navigating business meetings, Kathy saw the woman her granddaughter was becoming. Strong, independent, thoughtful. Every time Lily shared her ideas, Kathy felt a quiet pride, knowing she had played a role in shaping this version of her. But it wasn't just business. The emotional growth Lily had made was even more profound. Kathy had helped her learn how to trust herself, not just with work, but with life. And Lily was beginning to carve out her own identity, separate from her parents' influence. It was beautiful to witness. Kathy's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her reverie. It was a text from Diane. "I was thinking about you today. You're really doing it, aren't you?" Kathy smiled and quickly replied, I am. Finally living for myself. She leaned back into her chair, taking in the words. It wasn't just the business or the travels or the time spent with Lily that made her feel fulfilled. It was the fact that she had built this life, piece by piece, from the ground up. It hadn't come easy, but nothing worth having ever did. As for Greg and Sarah, they remained distant. Their attempts to reach out had faded, their calls becoming less frequent, their messages less insistent. Kathy didn't feel resentment, nor did she feel the need to reopen old wounds. They had made their choices, and she had made hers. They had lost their place in her life, and they seemed to understand that now. They were ghosts in the background, fading from her world with each passing day. Kathy had long since stopped looking back. The truth was, Kathy had learned something invaluable over the past year. She didn't need them anymore. She didn't need their approval, their validation. She had given so much of herself to others, and now, finally, it was her turn to receive. Not from them, but from herself. As her phone buzzed again, Kathy's thoughts turned inward. The new chapter of her life was unfolding before her, and the more she focused on what she wanted, the more she realized how full her heart felt. She was connected to the people who mattered, to the things that brought her joy, and to a future she had the power to shape. The sound of Lily's voice in the other room drifted to her ears, pulling her from her thoughts. She smiled to herself and stood up slowly, stretching, feeling the strength in her body. She had built a life that was real, a life that was her own. She was done waiting for anyone's permission to live it. The lesson she had learned, the lesson she had taught Lily, was clear. No one else had the right to define her future. It was hers to create, and hers alone. And for the first time, Kathy knew exactly who she was meant to be. The years had softened the edges of Kathy's past, turning the sharpness of old wounds into something she could look at from a distance. Her life had become a tapestry of quiet moments, meaningful work, and peaceful solitude. It wasn't the whirlwind of chaos she had once known, but it was a kind of serenity that was all her own. She spent her mornings at the boutique, making decisions that shaped not just her business, but her sense of purpose. Kathy's design work had grown beyond her expectations, and every new project felt like a victory, not just for the clients, but for her as well. Each piece of furniture, each room she designed, was a testament to the woman she had become, strong, self-assured, and deeply connected to what she had built from the ground up. But it wasn't just the work that filled Kathy's days. She had taken the time to nurture friendships, new relationships that valued her for who she truly was. People who didn't want anything from her other than her presence. Diane was always there, a steady voice of support. But Kathy had also opened herself up to new circles. Neighbors, other business owners, even a few women she met through yoga classes. She had built a network of people who, in their own quiet way, had helped her realize that she wasn't just important because of what she did, but because of who she was. It was a revelation that had come gradually. Kathy had spent so many years living for others, fighting for their approval, their love, and their recognition. But now, she had surrounded herself with people who saw her for her strengths, for the courage it had taken to step out of the shadow of the past. She wasn't just a mother, a grandmother, or a woman defined by the roles that others had created for her. She was simply Kathy, and that was enough. Despite her peace, Greg and Sarah hadn't truly faded from the periphery of her life. They still tried to reach out, sending occasional messages or making awkward calls. But Kathy had stopped responding. She had made the conscious decision not to engage with them, and as each month passed, their attempts grew more desperate, more disconnected from the life she was living now. One day, after another unsought message from Sarah, Kathy sat in her living room, the weight of the phone in her hand strangely heavy. She could feel the pull of the past, of their demands, of their need for her to bend to their will. But Kathy had learned a hard lesson over the years. Their need to control was not her responsibility anymore. Her peace, her space, was something she would protect fiercely. And so, she deleted the message without a second thought, letting the moment pass as effortlessly as the ones before it. She no longer felt the need to explain, to justify. She had nothing to prove. Her life now was defined by the small victories, like when Lily came to her with an idea for the boutique, a new direction that Kathy had never imagined, but embraced with open arms. Lily had taken on more responsibilities in the business, and Kathy watched her granddaughter not just grow in confidence, but in wisdom. It wasn't just the work they did together that brought them closer. It was the conversations, the shared moments of laughter, the quiet understanding that they both had found something meaningful in each other. "I can't believe how far we've come," Lily said one afternoon as they stood in the boutique, looking at the space they had transformed together. Kathy smiled, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We've only just begun." Lily's eyes shone, and Kathy knew that, just like her, Lily was finally living the life she deserved. The years passed, and Kathy continued to spend her days in peace, watching the business grow and her relationships deepen. She had become a woman she never thought she could be: independent, strong, self-assured. Her independence was more powerful than anything she had left behind. It had taken time for her to fully accept that freedom. At first, it felt foreign, even uncomfortable, but now it was the air she breathed. The sense of possibility was everywhere. As she sat by the fire that evening, with Lily curled up on the couch beside her, Kathy reflected on everything she had achieved. It was hard to remember now the woman she had been that fateful Christmas, the one who had walked out of Greg's house, unsure of her future, unsure of herself. But that woman had made the hardest decision of her life, and now, sitting here in the glow of the fire, Kathy understood that it had been the right one. She had learned that true peace comes not from external validation, but from the quiet confidence of knowing you've made the right choices. That peace didn't require others to understand. It didn't need permission. It only needed her. "I'm proud of you," Lily said, her voice warm, filled with meaning. Kathy turned to her, the words a balm on her heart. "I'm proud of you too," Kathy replied, her voice soft but sure. "We've done this together." And for the first time in a long time, Kathy truly believed it. She had built this life, she had made it hers, and in doing so, she had given herself, and Lily, a future free from the constraints of a past that no longer had any hold over them. As the fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls, Kathy smiled softly to herself. The life she had always dreamed of was no longer a distant hope. It was here, and it was beautiful. There was no more looking back. Only forward. The days had stretched into years now, and Kathy had become a quiet observer of the family she had once tried so hard to hold together. From a distance, she could see the way Greg and Sarah fumbled with their own version of life without her. It wasn't that Kathy took any satisfaction in their struggle, but it was impossible to ignore the deep, irrevocable fracture that had formed after she'd walked away. They had tried to rebuild, tried to salvage what was left of their relationships, but the cracks were too deep, the foundation too unstable. Kathy could see it in the way Greg no longer carried himself with the same confidence he once had. His attempts to reconnect felt forced, as if he was playing a role rather than engaging with someone who had been a central part of his life for so long. Sarah, too, seemed more brittle, her icy veneer cracking at the edges, but never enough to let anyone in. Kathy wasn't surprised. After all, they had built their lives on her sacrifice, her willingness to blend into the background, to suppress her own desires to make room for their needs. And now, without her, they were floundering. They didn't have her strength, they didn't have her wisdom, and they didn't have the will to rebuild from the ground up, as she had done. But Kathy didn't look back. She had learned long ago that the people who had taken her for granted were not her responsibility. Her family, as it was no longer a part of her life, not in the way they once were, and watching them from a distance, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of peace. They were no longer her burden to carry. Lily, on the other hand, had flourished in ways Kathy never expected. Her granddaughter, who had once been torn between loyalty to her parents and her own desires, was now a woman in full bloom, carving out her own path. Kathy had taught Lily more than just how to run a business. She had shown her what it meant to live authentically, to find the strength to build a future that was hers and hers alone. Each day, Lily took on more responsibility in the boutique, bringing fresh ideas and new energy. She had grown into a confident, poised young woman, and Kathy watched with pride as Lily made connections, built a network, and established her own reputation. The boutique had become as much Lily's legacy as it was Kathy's, a testament to both of their strengths, their values, and their determination to live life on their terms. Kathy spent her days focused on her passions, business, design, and travel, but most of all, the time she spent with Lily. The connection they had forged was unbreakable, built on mutual respect and understanding. Kathy was no longer just a grandmother, she was a mentor, a partner, and a friend. And as Lily's confidence grew, Kathy felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing she had played a pivotal role in shaping her future. She didn't think much about Greg or Sarah anymore. Their calls were infrequent, their messages increasingly awkward. Kathy had stopped responding to them months ago, and it felt good. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to make amends. Their place in her life had been replaced by something more meaningful: her work, her travels, and most importantly, her relationship with Lily. One day, Kathy stood in the boutique, surveying the space she and Lily had transformed together. The walls were adorned with paintings they had carefully selected, the shelves stocked with pieces of furniture and decor they had lovingly curated. It was a dream made real, a vision they had shared and brought to life. Lily walked in, her face lighting up as she looked around. "It looks amazing, Grandma. We've come so far." Kathy smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We really have, and it's just the beginning." Lily took a moment, then said, her voice filled with a new sense of clarity, "I've been thinking about expanding. I want to take what we've built here and make it bigger. I want to reach more people, create spaces for others to feel what we've created here." Kathy felt a swell of pride. Lily wasn't just running the business, she was dreaming, thinking ahead, envisioning the future. And Kathy was right there, guiding her, but also learning from her. Lily had become the woman Kathy had always hoped she would be, a woman who would forge her own path, not just follow the one laid out for her. The phone buzzed in Kathy's pocket, but she didn't check it. There was no urgency anymore. No one from her past needed her to answer. The people who truly mattered were the ones who shared her vision, her values. They were the ones who filled her life with meaning. Outside the window, the street was bustling with the kind of life Kathy had almost forgotten existed. But now, it was a life she had chosen, a life that was hers. The road ahead was clear. It had been forged by her strength, her resilience, and her willingness to walk away from what was familiar, to create something new, something real. The family she had known, the one that had once consumed so much of her energy, had moved to the margins of her world. She no longer needed to be a part of their drama, their struggles, their needs. She was creating her own legacy now, and it was a legacy that Lily would carry forward. As the days passed, Kathy quietly enjoyed her life, her successes, her peace, and the knowledge that she had made the right choice. Greg and Sarah remained on the outside looking in, realizing too late that they no longer had a place at the table she had built. And for Kathy, that realization was the final proof that the life she had reclaimed was more than just hers. It was the life she deserved. The years had been kind to Kathy. They had softened the edges of her past and carved out a space in her life where peace and purpose now resided. Her business, once a simple idea, had grown into something far beyond what she had ever imagined. The boutique she had built with Lily had become a well-established name in the community, a place people sought out for its warmth, its unique pieces, and the undeniable sense of care that Kathy and Lily poured into everything they created. Kathy had come to see it as more than just a business. It was her legacy, her mark on the world that would live long after she was gone. Her days were now filled with work that she loved, but it was no longer the frantic, overwhelming kind of work that had once drained her. No, this was different. This was purposeful, driven by passion, and supported by the strength of the community they had built. Every morning, Kathy walked into the boutique with a sense of pride that never grew old. She had done it. She had created something real, something that mattered. And the rewards, both tangible and emotional, were more than she could have hoped for. Lily's success, too, was undeniable. The boutique had expanded beyond its original walls, growing into new locations and attracting a loyal clientele. Kathy watched as Lily took charge of the business, guiding it with the same integrity and creativity that had been instilled in her. Their partnership had become something special, one that was rooted in love, respect, and mutual admiration. Kathy had always been proud of her granddaughter, but seeing her now, confident and capable, was a new kind of joy. Lily had built something from the foundation Kathy had laid, and it was thriving. As Kathy looked out the window one afternoon, watching the busy streets outside, she could see the success in everything around her. The city had changed, but in a way that reflected the change within her own life. What had once seemed so daunting, the idea of starting over, of rebuilding from the ground up, had become something she now understood in her bones. It wasn't about waiting for opportunities to come to her. It was about creating them, about carving out a future that was hers to shape. Meanwhile, Greg and Sarah, once central figures in her life, had faded into obscurity. Kathy had long since stopped tracking their movements, but every so often, she'd hear snippets about them through friends or mutual acquaintances. They had tried, she knew, to salvage what was left of their marriage, to rebuild the broken pieces of their family dynamic. But it was too late. They were irrelevant now, no longer a part of the fabric of Kathy's life. The people who had once held such power over her were now shadows, their influence reduced to nothing more than an afterthought. Kathy wasn't bitter about it. If anything, she was grateful. Their absence in her life had freed her to embrace what truly mattered. She had let go of the weight they had placed on her shoulders, the expectations they had shaped around her. In doing so, she had found herself, and she had found peace. Their struggles were no longer hers to carry, and for the first time, Kathy felt the full weight of her own autonomy. She spent her afternoons meeting with clients, discussing new design ideas, curating collections that reflected the vision she had always carried inside. Even though the boutique had taken on a life of its own, Kathy remained deeply involved, ensuring that everything was done with care, with intention, and with the same love that had driven her to start it in the first place. She didn't have to do it. She wanted to. It brought her joy, fulfillment, and the kind of purpose she had long ago lost in her years of sacrifice for others. Her travels, too, continued. Kathy had always dreamed of exploring the world, and now, with her business secure and her health thriving, she did. She visited places she had once only imagined, from the bustling streets of New York to the serene beauty of Japan. She no longer felt guilty about taking time for herself. Each trip, Each new experience was a celebration of the woman she had become, a woman who had learned to live for herself. As the months passed, Kathy's health remained strong. She spent time working on herself, not just her business, but her mind and body as well. Yoga, meditation, even simple walks through the park had become integral parts of her routine. Her body, though older, felt more vibrant than it ever had before, a testament to the years she had spent caring for others. But now the focus had shifted inward. She was thriving, mentally, physically, emotionally, something she had never fully allowed herself to experience before. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Diane, always there with her encouragement. "I'm so proud of you, Kathy. You're an inspiration." Kathy smiled, the words filling her with the warmth of a deep friendship that had endured. Diane had been there through it all, a constant presence in Kathy's life, and their bond had only grown stronger over time. It wasn't just the business or the success that mattered. It was the relationships Kathy had cultivated, the ones that gave her life meaning beyond what she could touch with her hands. And as she thought about the future, Kathy realized that the best was yet to come. Her life had become a beautiful, living testament to her strength, her resilience, and her ability to rebuild from the ground up. She didn't need Greg or Sarah anymore. She didn't need anyone's validation. She had found everything she needed within herself, and that was the greatest reward of all. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, Kathy sat back in her chair, looking around at the life she had built. She had created something lasting, something that would live on long after her, and she knew, deep in her heart, that it was all worth it. There was no more waiting, no more wondering if she had made the right choices. Kathy knew she had, and as the future unfolded before her, she was ready. Kathy sat in her office, gazing out the window at the bustling city below. The skyline, dotted with high-rise buildings, felt like a world she had only just begun to touch. The small boutique she had started with Lily was no longer just a local gem. It had become a recognized name. New locations were springing up, and clients now sought out the pieces Kathy and Lily had poured their souls into creating. It was beyond what Kathy had ever imagined for herself, and yet it felt exactly right. The empire she had built, brick by brick, had far surpassed her wildest dreams. Each day felt like a new opportunity to mold the future she had fought so hard to carve. The business wasn't just a financial success. It was a reflection of her, of everything she had learned, everything she had fought for. Kathy had turned her pain into purpose, her doubts into determination. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and every new accomplishment felt like a testament to her strength. Lily continued to flourish alongside her, and Kathy couldn't have been prouder. Watching her granddaughter take on more responsibility, making bold decisions, and becoming a confident leader in her own right was the greatest joy Kathy had ever known. Their partnership was more than just business. It was a legacy they were building together, a legacy that would outlast anything Greg or Sarah could ever touch. The values Kathy had instilled in Lily, resilience, independence, and a deep sense of self-worth, were now the foundation of everything they did. It was a healthy, vibrant new form of family, one built on respect, love, and shared dreams. Kathy felt a quiet satisfaction as she looked at Lily from across the room. She was a woman of her own now, full of ideas and plans for the future. Kathy had always hoped for this moment, the moment when Lily would find herself, when she would step into her own power. That moment had arrived, and Kathy was honored to watch it unfold. The future they were building together was limitless. Meanwhile, Greg and Sarah had faded further and further from the picture. Kathy didn't need to hear about their struggles anymore. They had tried to mend the broken pieces of their life, to recreate something that could never be fixed. but it was too late. They no longer had a place in Kathy's world, and with each passing year, their relevance diminished. Their messages grew less frequent. Their attempts at reconciliation more desperate but increasingly disconnected from the life Kathy had created. Kathy didn't need their apology, their approval, or their presence. The door had closed, and it was never going to open again. Kathy had built her life without them. Her relationships were now with people who valued her for who she was, who celebrated her independence, her strength, and her ability to live fully. She didn't need to carry the weight of family drama on her shoulders anymore. She had learned to let go, and in doing so, she had freed herself to live a life that was truly hers. It was hard to imagine the woman she had been a few years ago, the one who had walked out of Greg's house, uncertain, angry, and filled with the fear of what the future might hold. But Kathy had stepped into her power. She had reclaimed herself. And now, looking at the business she had built, the life she had created, she knew it had all been worth it. Every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of doubt, it had led her here. And the best part? She was just getting started. Kathy had begun to explore new ventures, ones that had always intrigued her but that she had put aside for so many years. She had always dreamed of mentoring others, of helping people who were trapped in toxic family dynamics find their way out. She had learned firsthand how to break free, and now she wanted to share that knowledge. She had started small, giving talks at women's groups, volunteering her time to counsel others who felt trapped in relationships that held them back. It felt incredibly fulfilling. Kathy knew that her story, her journey, could help others take the leap, just as she had. And it wasn't just about work. Kathy was living a life she never thought she would have. She traveled freely, without the guilt that had once followed her wherever she went. She'd visited new places, explored the art and culture of Paris, walked the cobblestone streets of Italy, and enjoyed the serene beauty of Japan. Every trip, every new experience was a celebration of her independence, her strength, and the life she had fought for. As Kathy sipped her coffee that morning, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had created the life she deserved, a life filled with passion, purpose, and freedom. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Diane, as always, offering words of encouragement. "Look at everything you've built, Kathy. You're a true inspiration." A smile tugged at Kathy's lips as she typed back. "I've built something worth living for. And I'm not done yet." The future stretched before her, wide open. She had nothing left to prove. Then, as the day wore on, Kathy took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. She thought about the empty house she'd left behind that Christmas, the one where she'd been told there was no room at the table. It felt so far away now. That house, that family, they had nothing left to offer her. But the life she had created? It was everything. The fire that had burned inside her had been rekindled, and it was stronger than ever. And as Kathy watched Lily continue to grow, her legacy was clear. The family legacy, the one that had almost destroyed her, would live on in a healthy new form. A form that was built not on sacrifice, but on mutual respect, love, and independence. Kathy smiled softly, knowing that the future she had built was more than just a life. It was her triumph. She had made the right choice.